Welcome back to the California Conversation. I'm Tess Abraham. The federal government is still shut down, and with that, certain programs are starting to be more affected. Now, just this past week, we saw that SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, was set to be defunded and shut down starting on November 1st. This clearly sparked national outrage, with SNAP beneficiaries even taking to social media and threatening to steal things from stores if they were not given money in order to buy groceries. California is home to 10% of the SNAP program beneficiaries, and so this is an issue that directly affects our state, and it's important that we understand what is going on here and address the issues at play. But while we start to hear the argument that millions of Americans will starve without the SNAP program, we have to wonder, is that really true, or are there deeper things that we need to consider? What is the role of the government in providing these social welfare programs? And are Christians required to support something unequivocally like SNAP simply out of compassion? We are going to get into all of it today. But before we get started, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you stay up to date on all things California politics. And if you want more information or sources cited in compiling today's episode, then you should check out the corresponding article on my website, which is linked below. All right, so I hope that you were all able to vote in the election earlier this week. And as of the date that I'm recording this podcast, I actually don't know the outcome of the election. And so I will keep you posted. Hopefully we can talk about it more next week. But for this week, I really want to focus on what has been circulating most through the news, and that is the controversy surrounding the federal SNAP program. So let's just start from the beginning. What is SNAP? Well, as I mentioned at the top of the show, it stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and is a federal government welfare program designed to help assist those with low income or who are maybe in extreme poverty situations, to assist them to be able to buy food. And so this is administered by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And basically what happens is people apply for this program based on certain eligibility requirements like income or household size. And then if they are eligible for the program, they are given what's known as an EBT card, or an electronic benefits transfer card, that basically acts as a debit card. And so they get a certain amount of money loaded onto it every single month. That's what the controversy is about, is if that money is going to continue being administered. But they get money on the card and they are able to go to the grocery store. They're able to buy themselves groceries and pay for it. And basically the government is paying for their groceries. Now, it's important from the outset to understand that SNAP benefits are specifically designed to be for food that is supposed to be able to be prepared at home. So think of things like fruits and vegetables, meats, dairy, bread, and so on. And really, it's so that people can carry out their daily lives. They can go to the store and choose the foods that they like and that they want to cook and prepare, but they're able to easily access government benefits to be able to afford them. Now, let's just go through a little bit of a history, because I think a history of the program is helpful for us to just know what the intent, what the purpose of it is, and then we'll shape how we're supposed to think about it today. So the first iteration of this program was actually developed coming out of the Great Depression. And this makes sense when you think about it, right? Clearly, there were so many people who were in severe, extreme poverty circumstances. The economy had completely collapsed, and this didn't only affect individuals and households who were trying to afford to eat and survive. It also affected the farmers who were growing food, because they suddenly had a surplus of crops that they were not able to sell to anyone because people couldn't afford to buy them. And so the government started to think, how can we come in? How can we bridge the gap between people who need food and farmers who can supply it, but they're not able to come together out of this terrible economic collapse? And so that is when President Roosevelt first created the food stamp program that would allow families to specifically buy the surplus of food that farmers had grown, so that farmers didn't have to destroy it, and it could continue to help them in their business, as well as help families to literally not starve and die. So this developed over the years into what is now known as the SNAP program. And so again, I just want to reiterate that the initial intent was to be a temporary safety net for families and individuals who literally just could not even afford to feed themselves or their families. Now, the state of the program today is that there are roughly 41 to 42 million Americans who participate in SNAP, and that totals to a little over 12% of the population of the United States. Now, to compare that to when SNAP first rolled out nationwide, which was back in 1974, then only 6% of the population was enrolled to receive SNAP benefits. So, from 1974 to now, we have essentially doubled in percentage of who is receiving these federal government benefits across the United States. So clearly, with the federal government shutdown still in effect, the U.S. Department of Agriculture announced last week that no new SNAP benefit allotments would be given starting on November 1st, which was just last Saturday. And so this means that the 42 million Americans who are arguably reliant on the program or who are used to receiving that money from the government to afford their groceries would no longer be receiving that, especially as the holidays start to roll around. And so obviously this is going to spark some outrage by people who are dependent on the program, outrage by people who think that the government needs to continue funding this program regardless of the shutdown. And so you may or may not have seen, but people took to social media in all forms. And I think the most shocking social media posts that we were seeing was there were quite a few of people who are used to receiving these benefits from the government who were threatening to just go into stores and steal whatever they wanted, who were threatening to cause chaos or violence in grocery stores simply because they were not receiving these benefits. And so clearly there was a little bit of wariness of these people who are used to receiving these benefits, who are now essentially threatening the government if they are not going to receive them. But even more than that, there were others who are coming out immediately blaming the Trump administration. People love to draw the comparison of the White House that is currently undergoing renovations while there are millions of Americans who are going to quote unquote starve from the lack of this program. There are also people saying that this isn't a partisan issue. And so overall, just most people are calling on the White House and on President Trump to take action to make sure that this program continues to be funded even amidst the government shutdown. But at the same time, as these calls that the program needs to continue to be funded, it has also caused a lot of people to do some investigation into the program, to look into why 41 to 42 million Americans are reliant on it, how many of these people are actually in dire extreme poverty circumstances that would warrant the program's original intent, and how the program is actually operating. And unfortunately, there has been a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse that has been discovered in recent days. And so that is what is causing controversy around this program. The questions and the dichotomy between there are people who we are being told are going to starve without this program, which arguably no one wants or no one should want. That would be horrendous if millions of Americans were actually dying from not receiving these benefits. But then there's also questions of, but this program has been abused. And there's actually blatant examples and receipts showing that recipients of these benefits oftentimes are not in maybe those extreme circumstances or are using the benefits in a way that was not designed by the program to be used. And so all of a sudden, it's just become a very confusing time. Is SNAP a good or bad thing? Should we support it? And it's especially confusing for people who are people of faith or who are Christians, because we want to love the poor. We want to make sure that people who are in need have access to resources that are available to them. But at the same time, then we start to have to ask questions about prudence and wisdom when it comes to it. So our first question that we're going to ask is, how does this affect California, before we get to asking what in the world are we supposed to think about what is going on? So like I mentioned, even though this is a federal government program and arguably a federal issue for them to solve, California is heavily influenced and affected by whether this program continues to be in place or if funding is paused. About 5.3 million people in California receive SNAP benefits, and that is 13.6% of our state's population, which is just staggering, and that is much higher than the national average. California alone accounts for roughly 10% of all SNAP recipients, which when you think about it is pretty wild because we are one of 50 states. And so to think that we are one of 50, but we account for 10% of people across the entire United States who receive SNAP benefits just seems like there is something off there. So clearly, we heavily account for a large majority of those who are receiving these benefits. And so a pause in the program is really going to affect 13% of our state's population. So we want to know what is going on here. But beyond just the impact that this has on Californians because of who is in the program, California is also directly involved in this issue because our state, as a matter of policy, has really sought over the years to expand eligibility to include more people than who are included under the federal government requirements. So, because SNAP is a federal program, it is very clear that anyone who is here illegally or who is an undocumented immigrant is not eligible to receive the benefits from the federal government. Most federal government programs are like that. Illegal or undocumented immigrants are not going to be eligible for those programs. Now, we know that California, though, is a sanctuary state, and California takes very seriously protecting undocumented and illegal immigrants. And so with that, we've seen that we also try to expand a lot of the benefits to them. And so we've talked in the past about how we provide free healthcare to illegal immigrants. And it is no surprise that we also have a state program that is really intended to close that gap for illegal or undocumented immigrants who are not eligible under SNAP to be eligible for the statewide food program and funnel the funds through that directly. And so that program is known as the California Food Assistance Program. And basically, in order to expand this, they have made certain illegal immigrants eligible. And when you enroll in the program, you don't need to provide a social security number if you don't have one. And certain requirements, like work requirements that are tied to the federal SNAP program, are also no longer required under our California state program. And so this means that certain illegal immigrants are eligible to obtain taxpayer funds that are really supposed to be going to citizens or residents of our country and our state. But now we are expanding that to be funneled directly to illegal or undocumented immigrants. And I just want to note, it's not for all undocumented immigrants yet, but the program does have aspirations over the next 2 years to officially roll out to all illegal immigrants, regardless of age, regardless of some of the requirements that are currently in place. So California has been taking these baby steps. I mean, I wouldn't really call them baby steps because they're huge leaps, but they've been taking these steps slowly over time in order to include more and more people in the program who are not eligible under the federal SNAP program. And this really isn't surprising in a state like California because over the years, we have become such a social welfare state. And just to prove this point, in 2022 alone, between federal, state, and local government programs across California, we spent close to $150 billion total on anti-poverty programs, which is so much money. That's just ridiculous. But you might be thinking, well, okay, but anti-poverty is good. We don't want people to be in poverty. But consider the fact that we spent $150 billion on those programs, and yet in 2022, California still ranked first place for the highest poverty rates across the country, as well as accounted for nearly half of the homeless population across the entire United States. So again, we just have that dichotomy between wanting to help the poor, wanting to help those who are low income or who just need some assistance, not wanting to always see that as a bad thing, and yet having serious questions raised about program effectiveness, waste of taxpayer money, and ultimately, at the end of the day, moral responsibility. So before we get into a response to the SNAP program, let's just look at some of the issues at play. What are things that have come up that has caused this topic to become controversial over the past week? Why are so many people talking about it? What is going on? Well, first and foremost, I just want to remind us again that with SNAP, because it's a federal government program, the reason that it's coming up is because of the government shutdown. And so no one called out SNAP without the influence of the shutdown and said, we need to look into this. Likely there's not going to be reform right away to the program because, again, it's all just coming up because of the government shutdown. And once the government reopens, the SNAP program will continue to be fully funded in the same way that all of the other programs that have been paused because of the shutdown will once again continue. Now, there have been serious questions that have been raised, and so there might come reform from it, and many are calling for reform because of the fraud that has been uncovered. But I just want to level set that there haven't been any politicians or legislatures who are bringing this up just as a matter of topic. This is coming up because of the government shutdown, and so it's likely that it will resume in the next few months whenever that gets resolved. At the same time, I do agree that we cannot and should not ignore the glaring problems that have come to light as a result of the shutdown. And so we need to look honestly at what those are. And so to do that, let's just level set about what the government is spending on this program. So in 2024, the federal government spent $99.8 billion on SNAP. That is just staggering. It's a lot of money. The states with the highest number of participants are usually the high cost of living states. So think of New York and our beloved California. But while the intention of the program is really to be supplementing nutrition, it's called nutrition assistance. It's supposed to be helping to buy food, but not be your entire grocery budget. A lot of people have been calling out that there are receipts literally showing that SNAP recipients spend the money on high quality or luxury items like caviar and lobster, which that should not be, that has never been part of my weekly grocery shopping, especially if I am on a budget or I'm trying to save money. Caviar and lobster have never quite been in my budget, but to each their own. Additionally, benefits are being proven that they're actually rarely being used for fresh food preparation. And this is something that we've seen with the whole MAHA movement, so the Make America Healthy Again, is that RFK Jr. has really also been pointing out that people who are on SNAP are using the money to buy junk food. They're using the money to buy processed candy and chips and really sugary sodas. And that's, again, not the intent of the program. If we go back to the intent of the program, it's supposed to be for fruits, vegetables, meats, breads, things that ensure that you are surviving. And so when you go to the store and you're buying candy and junk food, that does not aid your survival. That does not aid your nutrition. And so now it becomes a question of what is the government subsidizing? Is it subsidizing bad habits? Is it subsidizing foods that really are not going to help Americans to be able to survive? Or is it actually doing what it intends and it's keeping people literally alive? Would people starve if they didn't have access to potato chips, to sodas, to candy? Those are the questions that are being asked, and I think that those are fair and need answers. Now, it's also been reported that cashiers have seen EBT cards with balances on them well over $10,000, which again is staggering because I have never had that much in my monthly grocery allotment. And so it seems like even though the program is supposed to operate, that people get maybe a small amount of money each month that's just supposed to help supplement, that somehow people are ending up with thousands and thousands of dollars on these EBT cards. And so they are purchasing much more luxury items, luxury foods, things that the program was not designed for them to be able to buy. And of course, we have even more egregious case examples. And so there have been cases of beneficiaries who are purchasing groceries or other items using the SNAP benefits, so they are free to their own personal funds, but then turning around and reselling that food or using that in some sort of food that they do sell as a vendor. And so essentially they're pocketing all of the profit. And so there's been cases of people like stockpiling. I think in Hawaii, there was a story about stockpiling Spam and then turning around and selling that to vendors at a discount to the vendor. But obviously the person who's selling it is receiving all of the income because they didn't pay for it in the first place. And so that is a form of fraud that we see across California, especially. That happens a lot here with street vendors. And then on top of that, to make things even worse, they even found that there were 5,000 people who were enrolled and receiving currently actively SNAP benefits who were deceased. And so clearly those people did not need the SNAP benefits, but the money was going into their account each month, and then people would be spending those funds even though they were not supposed to be the intended recipients. So that's just a smattering of the different issues that we've seen come up with SNAP. And those are just surface level examples. There are so many stories coming out in the news showing that really there's just a lot of questions with this program. There obviously can be good case uses of the SNAP benefits, but there's also a ton of uses of the benefits that seem to be these fraudulent cases. And so we have to ask how much of the 41 to 42 million Americans who are receiving benefits, how much of the $99 billion that we spend in 2024 on these benefits is actually just being wasted in fraud, these fraud circumstances that we just talked about, and how much is genuinely helping those in need. And then if you want to look at the immigration issue, the USDA confirmed that in 2022, 1.5 million non-citizens were receiving over $4 billion in payouts for the year who were deemed ineligible. And so these are non-citizens who are not supposed to be eligible under any program, any state, who were receiving direct payouts of SNAP. So it is happening that non-citizens, that illegal immigrants are receiving federal government assistance somehow, some way, even though under the federal government, the guidelines for the program says that they should not be receiving that. So overall, so many stories of fraud, waste, and abuse that are coming to light. And honestly, I don't find it that surprising because just when you think of the numbers, it is hard to believe that 41 million Americans literally would starve or be in extreme poverty without this federal government assistance. It does seem like we have moved more toward a culture of being dependent on welfare rather than seeing it as a temporary safety net for a tough period of time in life when you are trying to maybe find a job, when maybe there's been a death in the family. Those are real circumstances. Those are important. But I would be very curious to understand how 41 million Americans every year are going through those hardship circumstances. So really, I think that the outrage over this program being even just paused during the government shutdown, many programs are paused. The outrage over that happening points to our sentiment as a country and as a state in California to how we think about government welfare programs and really to the immediate entitlement that we have seen across the board of people feeling very entitled to this money rather than seeing it as an extra benefit from the government to help supplement or to help add on to what you are already using of your own funds because you are already working at your own job to be supporting yourself or your family. Now, while I may argue that you should not be relying on the government for all of your nutrition assistance or your grocery budget, I do believe that you can rely on great companies like Amallow for their quality skincare products. Amallow is a great family-owned company right here in the United States that produces incredibly high quality products for your skincare using organic beef tallow. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds crazy. What is beef tallow and why do I want to rub it on my skin? Well, beef tallow actually has been found to be rich in fats that closely resemble the structure of the human skin. And so this means that it's really good at moisturizing while also not clogging pores. It also locks in moisture. It creates a protective barrier on the skin. And so this means that it is very beneficial for dry, damaged, or sensitive skin. And personally, I have seen such great results from using it. Amallow uses high quality ingredients. So they use grass-fed, grass-finished tallow, which is even higher quality than the meat that I'm eating sometimes. They use 100% organic almond oil as well as pure and organic essential oils. So you can feel very good about putting this on your skin. You don't need to worry about what the ingredients are or if they have endocrine disruptors or any of the questions that we have been asking within recent years while learning about our health and how to take care of ourselves. I personally use their tallow products every single night. I absolutely love the vanilla latte scent, but if you also want more of a nighttime, helping to relax scent, they have a lavender that is also just incredible. It's amazing. It's hard to believe that it all comes from essential oils because it just smells so fantastic. And let me tell you, it has completely changed my skin. My skin is so much softer. I genuinely enjoy. I look forward to at night when I get to put it on. It's a great little skincare routine. And it's nice to not have to use a million products that I don't understand what's in them or are probably toxic to my body. So if you are ready for a natural, healthy, and beautiful glow, then you should check them out today at amallow.com/TessAbraham. That's amallow.com/TessAbraham. And if you shop using that link, then you actually will get 15% off your order. So go check them out today. See that they have so many more products than just tallow. They also have clean perfume, they have lip gloss, and they even have a sun balm that I have been dying to try. And if you've tried it, drop a comment below and let me know how it works because I need a good tallow sunscreen. So go check it out at amallow.com/TessAbraham to get 15% off your order and to support the show. So getting back to the SNAP program, as a Christian or conservative, how do we think about what is going on with the SNAP program? Should we or should we not support social welfare programs like SNAP? Should we or should we not expose the fraud and waste that is going on? Should we continue to want the program to work? Can we love our neighbors and love the poor? Just so many questions that are coming up. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because you know that my heart in this whole program, this whole podcast, is to help you, if you live in California, to think about California politics. It's to help you be informed as to the legislation that is being passed in our state. It's to help you know how you can get involved in politics and make a difference here. And I think that even though something like SNAP is federal, and maybe there's not a ton of change that we can do at the state level, it's still easy to get confused. It's easy to be manipulated by the media. It's easy to have our faith or to have our spiritual beliefs or to have our love for other people really used against us to say that you need to support every single program that in theory is supposed to help vulnerable or underserved groups. And so I just want to talk to you as my fellow conservatives or Christians or anyone who is here listening to say, what do we think about this? Should we support it? Can we call out the abuse? What really is our response? So to do that, the first point I want to make before diving into all of my many points is that we need honesty. Honesty is required to face what is going on, how we are going to respond. And if we don't have honesty, then we are not going to get it right. And we will have far more questions than we do answers. And so in each facet of this response, let's choose first and foremost to be honest about what is going on. The first thing that honesty demands is to adequately define and engage with the role of government. Like I mentioned, it seems like there is this belief going around that it is the role of government to keep everyone out of poverty and to make sure that every single person is fed and taken care of and can live the life that they want. But we have to ask, when certain benefits from SNAP are being used to fund sugar, to fund junk food, to fund even non-essentials like coffee, is it the government's job to make sure that Americans have access to all of those things? Is it the purpose of government to keep every single person out of poverty at the expense of the taxpayer, out of the expense of the people who are not in poverty because of their own hard work and individual responsibility? I would answer to those questions, no. And let me explain why. The founders never intended for our government to create this system where there is comfort and financial security for every single person, regardless of their own actions or what they choose to do. Our government wants to guarantee freedom and justice. And so when the government starts to really cross over into managing the affairs of its citizens and making sure that they have all that they need, is when you start to make people dependent on government rather than independent agents who maybe from time to time need to rely on that safety net to keep them out of extreme circumstances. And really, that's because I believe that poverty relief should be temporary, it should be localized, and it should be voluntary, which means that certain things like SNAP, not only SNAP, but certain welfare programs should be primarily rooted in community. It should be rooted in churches. It should be rooted in all of the safety nets you have around you, charities. Those things should be supported in order to help the poor, to help those in need. But it shouldn't only just be a government issue where the government needs to come in and make sure that every single person is taken care of. Again, government is going to protect your rights, but government is not going to provide for all of your needs. Plus, as I mentioned, this program has expanded well beyond the essentials. So if we are going to be honest, if we're going to have an honest look at it, we need to admit here that people are not going to the store using their SNAP benefits to buy the basic essentials that they need just to survive. There might be some cases of people doing that, but there is a large majority of fraud, waste, and abuse of situations where people are using it to buy the sugary snacks and drinks that we talked about, to buy things that are really funding diabetes, obesity, heart disease. And this is not just my own personal thoughts. There was a study conducted by the Wall Street Journal where they estimate that nearly 3/4 of food stamp beneficiaries are considered obese. And that is wild to think about, because the entire point of food stamps, the entire point of the program is to help people to not starve. If you are obese, there is something happening there where you do have access to an overabundance of food, or you are using those benefits for foods that are not healthy, that are not aiding your nutrition, but are actually contributing to these underlying diseases that we do not want to be funding as taxpayers. So there's some sort of disconnect that is happening here, and it is not the role of government to make sure that everyone has access to these unhealthy foods that are supplementing nutrition but aren't actually helping people to make sure that they don't starve. And so the second thing that honesty demands is that we face these stories of abuse, the evidence of widespread abuse that we are seeing head on, and we look at it directly and we work to address it. And so just ignoring the billions of dollars that are being wasted on this program, that are being irresponsibly spent by our government because it's the money of their own constituents, it's money from you and from me that we put into this program, to just ignore that is wrong. It is completely wrong of the government to do. We cannot turn a blind eye to it. Just because you believe some people should be eligible for the program doesn't mean that you now have to agree that everyone enrolled in the program is eligible. And it also doesn't mean that you have to just wash away the abuse and say, well, we take a little abuse because we want to make sure that the people who really need it have access to it. I believe that's wrong. We need to be able to address both issues head on to make sure that fraud and abuse actually stops happening. And one reason for this is, did you know that food stamp programs actually increase inflation? And so food prices increase by 1% for every 12% increase in spending on food stamp programs like SNAP. So as SNAP continues to increase, as we've seen that it has doubled in its participation, which means that the budget has also massively increased over the years. As SNAP spending increases, inflation increases, which means that when you and I go to the store, our grocery prices are higher in part because of social welfare programs. And there's an estimated 150% increase due to the rise in food stamps over the years, which has been increasing inflation and hurting everyone else who still needs to pay for their own groceries, who's not reliant on the government to pay for them. And so this just shows us we have to take SNAP seriously. We have to take stories of fraud and abuse seriously. It's not as simple as, well, I'm going to pay money to the government in taxes anyway, and so do with it as you will. There are direct downstream effects, as there are with every policy that's enacted by the government, that affect your life and mine, and that are actually hurting our economy because it's pushing us into higher and higher inflation. The third thing that honesty demands in regards to the SNAP program is that we reject bad policies that hurt Americans. And you already know that I'm going to talk about this. As soon as I mentioned that illegal immigrants are gaining access to taxpayer-funded SNAP benefits, I'm sure that you knew that that was going to come up in my response. We should not be using taxpayer funds to pay for the social welfare benefits for anything, healthcare or SNAP, anything for illegal immigrants. Full stop, period, end of story. This is not a comment on the dignity or worth of illegal immigrants. Illegal immigrants should be able to buy food. I do not want all of them to starve. That is not what I or anyone else is saying. What it is saying, it is commenting on the role of government and how a government needs to operate with regard to taking care of its own citizens. The American government cannot care and protect and value and make sure that every single person on this planet is taken care of and has food. There has to be some sort of a limit in order to make sure that its programs are actually effective. And so the limit is the people who are charged under its care, namely its citizens and its legal residents who have gone through the process to be here legally. Those who come here illegally forfeit certain benefits that they would have if they were citizens here or if they went through the legal process. And so think of it in the same way that we think of criminals. If you commit a crime, any crime, I'm not talking about the crime of coming to the country, I just mean any crime. If you go out and you steal something, or if you go out and heaven forbid, you murder somebody, you've now forfeit certain rights. You no longer get to be free in society because you're a danger to society. And so that means you are going to likely spend life or spend some time in prison, right? Other people have freedom. Other people are able to walk free, but you don't. And you don't because you made a decision that shows that you cannot be trusted and that the government has to protect the majority of people over making sure that you can still do what you want. The same thing is true with illegal immigration. If you are here illegally, you have forfeited certain benefits that you would have if you became a citizen. And if you go through the legal process to be here legally, you will have access eventually when you become a citizen to those benefits. But it's also important to note that the people who go through the legal process don't have access to welfare. My husband is a green card holder. We have gone through the time, the money, the legal processes for him to be here. And part of getting his green card was agreeing that he would not be eligible for social welfare programs. So the people who are here through the legal process don't have access to government funds if they fall on hard times. But the people who are here illegally are being funded by the government by the federal government unknowingly, but by our state government willingly in order to be here and obtain access to those benefits. That is morally wrong. It is unfair, it is unjust, and it is not how a government needs to operate in order to be effective, in order to support the people who are under its jurisdiction. The idea that California taxes its citizens and its residents at some of the highest rates across the nation, and that living here, we pay some of the highest cost of living ever to be here. And then it turns around and it takes our tax money to turn around and give that money to non-citizens is just a huge slap in the face to anyone who is here illegally and to the people who California should be taking care of first and foremost. Another example for you is like if a father took food away from his biological child or adopted child, the child who is under their care. If parents took food away from their children and gave it instead to other children and then watched their children starve, that would be morally wrong. Not because other children don't deserve food, but because the father or mother who has their own children have a responsibility, an obligation to those children first and foremost, whether biologically or by adoption, doesn't matter. Same thing with the government. Whether you are here because you were born a citizen here or you came through the legal process, the government has a responsibility to you first before it is taking your money and giving it to people who are not under its care. That is completely disordered, and that type of disorder leads to the kind of chaos that incentivizes further illegal immigration and crime. It incentivizes more people to cross our border illegally and come to states like California, where they know that they can get an EBT card, where they know that they will have thousands of dollars that they can spend on things like food, that they can just live off of the government here, off of our welfare programs. And so now, of course, they're incentivized to come here. They're not going to be arrested. They're not going to be deported because California is a sanctuary state, and they're going to get money to live here. It's wrong. It's wrong. And lastly, the fourth and final thing that honesty demands is that we hold multiple principles at the same time in tension with one another. And this is where I want to specifically respond to the biblical arguments that are being made by people who are trying to guilt Christians into believing that we just have to unequivocally support SNAP at all costs because we need to care for the poor. Now, the Bible does say to care for the poor. The Bible does say to take care of the least of these. The Bible also says that if you don't work, you don't eat. And that's straight out of Proverbs. And I find that oftentimes people who want to make a biblical argument are one-sided. They are not taking the entire Bible in context. They are not using the principles in conjunction and correlation with one another. And so if we are going to use the Bible, we need to look at the whole of the Bible. We need to look at the context of what is being said by the Bible, and we need to apply it honestly and accurately in terms of our circumstances. And so when it comes to people saying, well, you need to feed the poor, and so we need to support social welfare programs because we need to feed the poor. First, we need to understand that Jesus is saying this command to individual believers or to the church. Jesus is not requiring that the government has to come in and feed the poor at all costs. And that is usually a correlation that people make that is wrong. They take a certain command or principle from Christ and they now apply that to their government. And so now it is the job of government to go out and do what Jesus was calling for his own followers to do. Charities, churches, they should all be empowered and supported to help feed the poor. But there are a few situations that actually undermine churches being able to do this adequately. When you allow for rampant fraud and abuse, when you allow for people to take advantage of social welfare when maybe they don't need it, it makes it a lot harder when you create that culture now for a church to identify who is actually in need and who is just trying to take advantage of whatever system, whatever benefits, whatever handouts they are being given. Don't conflate the commands of Christ to individually in your lives not look down on the poor, to help the poor where you can, to still love them, welcome them into your church, help them get to know their individual circumstance and use wisdom and sound judgment when aiding them, with also just a blanket statement that the government has to make sure that anyone who claims that they are poor, that the government is paying to feed them. That is not what the commands of Jesus are saying. And one more point on that, by the government taking money from taxpayers and then turning around and giving it to SNAP beneficiaries, that is compulsory. And nowhere in the Bible do we see compulsory giving. We see that when the Bible talks about generosity, when it comes to helping the poor, that it is always voluntary, that Christ says that God loves a cheerful giver and not a one who is giving out of compulsion. And yet when our tax dollars are used for it, that is the direct definition of giving through compulsion. So you cannot just say, the Bible says to love and feed the poor, therefore we have to support SNAP. We are allowed to use, and we are actually told to use discernment, to use wisdom, to use wise judgment, to seek counsel. It is much more complicated than just the blanket statements that you see, honestly, being made from people who are not even Christians. It really is funny to me when someone is getting on TikTok or Instagram and making reels about what the Bible says, and they themselves don't even believe the Bible. So just want to level set that for you. All in all, the root issue, especially for Christians, is the idea of compassion. Many like to make the argument that it is more compassionate to support social welfare programs. But please remember that compassion does not mean that you have to now have a lack of discernment or boundaries. Compassion is informed by biblical wisdom. Compassion is going to set in place safeguards, and compassion is going to consider all parties who are involved. It's not only going to consider the poor or the person dependent on welfare benefits, it's also going to consider the family who is paying a lot of money each month in taxes in order to support those social welfare programs and who are harmed when those programs are abused. And it is actually more compassionate to help people, to assist them, to again, take responsibility for their lives, to stand on their own 2 feet, to find help and rest in their communities, in their churches, in nonprofits, rather than continually perpetuating the cycle of being reliant and dependent solely on the government. So, as you continue to see information spreading about this program, as we read more stories of fraud and abuse, as we see more people continue to blame Donald Trump or Republicans for being discompassionate toward poor people, just remember that true compassion requires honesty, and honesty demands so much more than what is being pushed in the mainstream narrative by states like ours. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope it was helpful for you as you navigate life in our state and as you navigate the federal government shutdown and all the issues that brings with it. Please spread the word and share this show with your friends, family, and fellow Californians. And I will see you back here next week for another episode of the California Conversation.